Hello and welcome to the Wednesday Word at the Free Methodist Church, Santa Barbara. My name is Jim Wright. God gives us wine to gladden the heart, oil to make our faces shine, and bread to strengthen our hearts. So says the psalmist in Psalm 104. Our theme today is stewardship of the earth, and I would like us to begin by taking a break. So if you're able, please do sit down now and set aside just a couple of minutes from whatever multitasking you might be doing. I'm asking you to find a comfortable chair to sit with your legs uncrossed, feet firmly planted on the humus. I would like you to listen to a piece of music for exactly 2 minutes and to imagine a gentle mist or light rain which is causing drops off leaves of plants and trees. A picture will appear on the screen suggesting this, but it's so familiar you may find it more interesting just to close your eyes and let your visual imagination take over as the music plays. When your attention wanders, with great gentleness, just draw your attention back to the image of rain suggested by the music. I asked you to interrupt your day by stopping and listening and imagining, because I believe our subject, caring for creation, is of such importance that it cannot be dealt with by our usual approaches. No, business as usual simply won't do. I don't have any evidence that the composer of that music had any conscious desire to evoke an image of gentle rain dropping off leaves. That was entirely me, and I'm not very musical. However, the power of the image seemed important to me, as we in Santa Barbara County have just been through the driest year in the past 10. And most of the last 10 years have been drought years, so this was a very dry year. And at least we had 10 inches of rain. San Luis Obispo County has had 4.5. I fear it's going to be a brutal autumn. In response to this climate crisis, and I can in conscience only refer to it as a climate crisis, not merely climate change, I want to make 2 theological points and 2 practical ones. First, the theology. I would like to suggest to you that this crisis is increasingly being seen by observers as a crisis that is moral and spiritual as much as it is technological, economic, and political. In other words, it's not so much a how-to problem as a want-to problem. And I believe this gives us in the church an excellent opportunity to get involved. After all, as Christians, do we not have 2,000 years of reflection on moral and spiritual crises? Have we not learned a thing or two along the way that could help? I suggest to you that the spiritual disciplines are our great contribution to this debate. Because the spiritual disciplines are at root all attempts to interrupt business as usual. Solitude interrupts our incessant desire to be with others. Silence interrupts our incessant desire to impress others. Fasting interrupts our eating. Sabbath interrupts our working. So this is the first point I want to make. Unless we see our need to interrupt business as usual, just as I ask you to do in a tiny way by sitting down with your eyes closed for 2 minutes listening to music, we will never engage with the climate crisis with the seriousness which it demands. The second theological point I want to make is why, oh why, do we compress almost the entirety of the Bible's witness on creation and our relationship with the non-human elements of that creation into 2 verses in Genesis chapter 1. These are the 2 verses in which humans are given a mandate to exercise dominion or stewardship, depending on your reading, over creation. Now, I do affirm the great importance of the Genesis accounts of creation in shaping our understanding of the human vocation in relation to the non-human creation. But what about the entirety of the Pentateuch, with its numerous commands about how the people of God are to care for plants and animals? And of Job, with its lengthy description of God's self-revelation to Job. And that was almost entirely about God's creation of and care for the physical and animal world. And of Psalms, from which our earlier quote about wine and oil and bread came. And of the Gospels, with Jesus' multitudinous references to plants and animals, weather, topography and soils. Would we take any other critical subject and compress it into 2 verses in inglorious isolation from the rest of Scripture? And this is important because if you think that the human mandate, your mandate from God, is simply to exercise dominion over nature, you will likely have a much reduced relationship with it than would happen if you take seriously the entirety of the scriptural picture. So much for the theological points. And now for a couple of practical ones. Now, I'm conscious that many people are in agreement that the climate is in some kind of crisis. And they accept that human action is almost certainly the cause of this. But they don't know what to do. And frankly, they feel weary even thinking about it, so they do nothing, or practically nothing. But just in case you may find doing something an attractive idea, but are confused by mixed messaging, perhaps I can suggest 2 things, which are both close at hand. First, throw away less food. Second, eat less meat. In relation to throwing away less food, did you know that the average American throws away almost 1/3 of all the food they buy? 1/3. Now, it's estimated that food production contributes about 1/4 of all our greenhouse gas emissions. This is partly due to the carbon dioxide that is pumped into the atmosphere during the production and packaging and transporting and storing and cooking of the food, and partly by all the methane that's pumped into the atmosphere by letting the food rot in landfills after we've discarded it. Food waste is therefore a big deal. If we can reduce it, we can make a big impact. We can also reduce our trash that we put into the brown bins every week, and we can save money on food bills. How do we reduce food waste? 2 simple suggestions. First, always check your pantry and your fridge and freezer before you go shopping, so you don't buy duplicates that then get left in the back of the chiller until they go mouldy. Second, the best before and sell-by dates on packaging are not standardized, and they're largely intended for the seller to rotate the stock. They're not a statement that after a certain date you should not eat that item. Now, humans have managed pretty well for millennia before sell-by dates and electric fridges, and we did so by relying on our sense of smell, does it smell off, and our sense of sight, does it look mouldy. Use these 2 senses and your common sense. If it smells okay, it doesn't look mouldy, it's highly likely to be fine to eat. As to reducing meat consumption, I acknowledge the attraction for many of us of quick, relatively cheap protein. However, we absolutely can reduce our consumption, especially of red meat, and still eat extremely well. Heather, the woman to whom I have the great good fortune to be married, has been getting us to eat an overwhelmingly Mediterranean diet these past few years. We rarely eat meat, and to the extent we do, it's a great treat. But our overall diet is fabulous, with delicious food, great flavours, and very obvious health benefits. And we're responding to God's call to care for his planet. So, please be open to interrupting business as usual. Please be open to the richness of the biblical picture of the non-human creation and our engagement with it. Please try to throw away less food. Please try to eat less meat. God gives us wine to gladden the heart, oil to make our faces shine, and bread to strengthen our hearts. Blessed be his name.
This has been Wednesday Word with the Free Methodist Church of Santa Barbara. We hope that you will join us for worship this week. Our home church video will be posted at 7 o'clock a.m. on our YouTube channel, and we will be meeting for worship under the tent in our upper parking lot at 9:30 a.m. We hope to see you there.